why should degens care about this? I think there's this funny new term that is called a PhD gen, PhD gen. I think we're kind of seeing the birth of like a new type of user that is actually starting to look deeply into the space. And as I said, like I started investing into biotech companies when I was 21. Like it's not, once you figure out a little bit of how it works, it's not rocket science, but it's been very opaque so far. And so I think what DeSci offers, or what this new asset class really offers, is for people to have way more access to data and truth, and to be able to participate in the upside much, much, much earlier.
Web3 offers a brand new petri dish.
Our job is to buy great tech at great prices.
AI is also libertarian, right?
Enable a use case that people haven't been able to do today.
The next hundreds of millions of players, they will come to the market through mobile.
My personal reason why I could be bullish in the next 12 months is BlockCrunch is not a licensed financial advisor and is purely for informational and entertainment purposes only. All opinions are personal, and the show may discuss assets that the host or guests have positions in or may be actively buying or selling. All investments carry risk, so consult with a financial professional before making any investment decisions.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. I'm your host, Jason Choi. I'm the co-founder of Tangent, where we make founder-driven venture bets and thesis-driven liquid bets in crypto. Now, recently, crypto seems to have gotten excited over something called DeSci, or decentralized science, which is a movement that promises to radically transform how research is funded, conducted, and shared in medical sciences or any form of science. So Twitter got very excited because CZ, the former CEO of Binance, attended a DeSci event. And as traders do, they always get excited over whatever they see on Twitter. So I thought it's timely to do an episode to educate the public on what exactly DeSci is. Now, just to give some context as well, we at Tangent also invested in a project in DeSci a year ago called Amino Chain, which is already generating revenue by offering pharma companies access to human samples for drug development. But that is just one of many, many different use cases of DeSci. So at the forefront of DeSci are two big projects that I'm very, very excited to have on the show today to talk to us about what this movement is about. So first of all, we have Alex, who is the Web3 co-lead at VitaDAO, and also Paul, who is the founder of Molecule and Bio. So both of which are exploring innovative ways that crypto can accelerate this vertical. So welcome to the show, guys.
Awesome to be here, Jason. Thanks so much for the invite.
Thanks for having us, Jason.
Awesome. Well, so I guess just to start off at a high level, because I think a lot of people are hearing about DeSci for the first time, maybe in the past 2 weeks. What exactly is DeSci to you guys, and how did you guys discover this vertical? Alex, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure thing. So as you pointed out, like DeSci is essentially a new approach to try to create a new scientific system for research and collaboration, leveraging essentially blockchain tech, decentralized networks, and Web3 tools. And it is essentially trying to fix some of the common problems that we have in traditional science, most notably funding, access to research, collaboration, and scientific structure. And to your point, how I came across DeSci, it was actually when I was doing investment research at L1D, which is the biggest crypto asset manager in Switzerland. So I actually came across DeSci when I was doing investment DD at Molecule, which is Paul's company. So he was the one that introduced me to DeSci back in 2021. I got super passionate about it, so much so that I actually decided to invest my entire time in developing this and making this happen.
And Paul, what was your background? So you're an OG in the DeSci space. Like, how did you discover this thing, and what made you start what you're working on right now?
Yeah, 100%. So I spent a lot of my teenage years in different online biohacking communities. So it's like 15, 16, and these were Reddit forums that were dedicated to things like diabetes research or essentially diabetic patients developing their own make-at-home insulin, for instance. Found that super interesting. Or in other cases, nootropic communities that were looking at brain health, different supplements. In other cases, longevity communities, mental health communities. And I noticed that there was a common thread among all of them, which was like, on the one side, there's like open scientific discovery online and online communities. And then on the other side, these were often like patient communities that simply didn't have access to a certain medication. Insulin pricing, for instance, was a huge issue in the United States for a long time. In other cases, these were cancer research communities that couldn't access a specific cancer medication and were looking for alternatives. I found that super interesting. I studied economics originally in Switzerland. And during my studies was trading biotech stocks. That's kind of my next foray. I was like, how can I spend so much time online in these different communities, learning about things? So I'm really like a polymath when it comes to science, and had the complete opposite experience than in these online communities. If you've ever traded biotech stocks, you typically trade them at like the burn rate of the company, meaning kind of the stock trades down, 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 and then at some point you have like a data release, and then it goes like 5x in a day or like minus 90%. So it's really like a make or break kind of thing. Actually, many people that I've spoken to from biotech compare the crypto market and the biotech market, that they're very similar in meaning that it's like there's a lot of assets and it's either like make or break. And if you make it, it turns out really big. Then learned about Bitcoin. Learned about Bitcoin during that time. That was 2014. I worked at Consensus for a while. And then while working at Consensus, we were working on data attestations and how we encrypt data on chain. So kind of like how could you attach a driver's license, for instance, to a digital identity, like a wallet, but secure that so that you're not revealing that information. Around the same time, CryptoKitties emerged as like the first big NFT boom. And I asked myself the simple question of like, what if instead of attaching a picture of a cat to an NFT, we instead attach like a new piece of medical research? And we encrypt that on chain so that the actual underlying IP rights can actually be secured. I wrote an article about that in August 2018, which is titled Token Bonding Curves for like IP curation or like scientific curation. Then started building Molecule in 2019. One of the first big projects where actually one of the first huge successes in DeSci where this framework that we've been developing in Molecule came to use was in VitaDAO. Which was kind of a community that formed in mid-2021, early 2021 to mid-2021. It launched. It's now almost 3.5 years ago. I think the term, maybe to make a full loop, the term DeSci first started being used in October 2021. I remember hosting a panel at LizCon around ETH Lisbon 2021. And so that's really... VitaDAO actually made DeSci a thing before DeSci was even a term. And then as more and more people started building in the space, it kind of became a thing.
And I think what would be really helpful is for someone to understand, what is their kind of journey of a user as they use VitaDAO, right? So if I am completely new to DeSci, let's say I walk into the VitaDAO website, what can I do there? How do I, what do I even start?
Yeah, happy to take that one. So, I think the best thing you can do as a new user is just to try to navigate Discord, which is where the community is run. Try to introduce yourself. Try to get a sense of what is happening, of what people that is in there that you can connect with. And maybe depending on your background and your skill set, you can actually start contributing to some of our projects as well. Right. So if you're a scientist, for instance, you can apply for funding. If you're, for instance, a young PhD or postdoc that might, be frustrated with academia, which is not uncommon, you can potentially be part of one of our incubation programs. So it really depends on your skill set. Or if you're more of a crypto native type of guy, you can also take a look at the projects that we're launching. And potentially, contribute on designing token economics of these projects or increasing awareness, building the community, all this type of stuff. So we do rely on a heavily diverse community inside these DAOs. And so irrespective of your background, I see a way for you to contribute. So again, I think joining Discord and try to get a sense of the initiatives that are going on, participated in the community calls. We actually had a very big call yesterday. With Albert Gray, which is one very prominent longevity researcher. So it was very good to see, for instance, the community engaging and asking questions about his project. It's one project that we are thinking about launching now. There is a proposal live where the community is essentially deciding on whether or not they should participate in the funding. There's multiple ways you can do this, and it really depends on your interest and on your background.
Yeah, I guess taking a step back here, what is VitaDAO's goal? What is this DAO trying to achieve? You mentioned that scientists can come fundraise. What are they fundraising for? And you mentioned crypto natives can come and help with the token designs. Who are they designing the crypto tokenomics for?
Yeah, sure thing. So VitaDAO is essentially a decentralized community trying to solve aging, right? This is obviously not an easy task. But it is essentially trying to leverage the DeSci tools that we have available, like IP tokens and IP NFTs, and we can talk a little bit more about that in detail. But it's essentially trying to leverage all these Web3 tools to create a more efficient and accelerate research on the longevity space with the goal of fixing aging, right? So the community is essentially comprised of people that have this goal. They all want to extend their lifespan and their health span. And they truly believe in the mission, and they are like funding these research projects together. They are developing them together as a community, and maybe in the future they could potentially benefit from any therapeutics that might result from these researches as well. So this is really like the crux of it. And it is a DAO, right? So it is structured as a DAO, and what that means is there is a governance process. So for every funding decision, for instance, there needs to be a proposal that is approved or denied by the community. So if you're a token holder, if you have a stake in that in our community, you can essentially use that token to vote on whether or not you wanna be funding a specific research project, right? So far, VitaDAO has funded 24 projects. Using this IP NFT framework, has deployed more than $4 million. And there's a lot more coming. So to your last point about like who's designing token economics, there is what we called internally a Web3 pod, which is essentially almost like a working group or a specific team dedicated to the Web3 components of VitaDAO. So this is like comprised of people where that spend like the majority of their time contributing to that community, right? So this is where I fit in. So I'm the Web3 co-lead in VitaDAO, and like I'm like guiding the community towards what could be good token economic designs, for instance. But at the end of the day, like it really comes down to governance, and whoever is like token holder and a participant in that community has the ultimate voice on whether or not it went approved, whatever was suggested by the pods.
So maybe this is a question for Paul as well. So for Molecule, you guys provide the framework for a lot of DAOs like VitaDAO to fund different type of medical research. So I see that there's HairDAO that I think funds research in like hair loss. There's multiple others as well. So I'm curious, like what is missing from the way that current scientific funding or medical research is done, and why is crypto the best way to solve it?
So VitaDAO, I think, tries to connect actually people that are interested in longevity and healthcare with the solutions that are being developed in the market today. So one of the core founding principles of VitaDAO is really kind of democratizing access to new longevity therapeutics. That's kind of one of the founding principles. And if you look at who's funding longevity therapeutics or interventions today, it's really kind of like some of the richest people in the world. And I think if they succeed at kind of developing new therapeutics, it is, in my view, kind of unlikely that they'll be accessible to most people, right? And so as a founding principle of crypto, I think has kind of democratized financial access, right? And democratized democratized how to make a living and investing into like all of these new coins and investing into technology. And at VitaDAO, we think that a similar thing should be true for like longevity therapeutics. So the goal of anything that VitaDAO is developing long-term is to make it available for as many people as possible, and also to actually connect people, retail, with having an understanding of the new cool things that are actually being developed that could extend their lifespan today. And so the mission is kind of twofold. On the one side, to fund like moonshot projects and secure the IP around that, and I'll talk a little bit how that framework works to your other question. But on the other side, also, we're launching kind of a series of products that people can buy today to make longevity and kind of extend their lifespan already. We actually launched the first product at DEF CON. So you mentioned the meetup that we had together with CZ and Vitalik. We actually gave them samples of our first product, which is VD001, which got approved by the Thai FDA. And it's a very simple thing, actually. It's a spermidine supplement that is naturally sourced, and so it's high. It's a high dose spermidine supplement. Spermidine is actually really expensive, often to buy and to find in high quality. It's something that Brian Johnson takes a lot of, and it's one of the things that are most that we have the best kind of data about already, and that is very safe for people to take. So, and then on the other side, so that's kind of like, let's say, normal retail. And then obviously you have scientists, and scientists across the world really struggle to get funding for their innovation. Alex just mentioned a couple of projects that have actually been funded through VitaDAO. Many of those scientists would have never been funded otherwise. So there's so much academic research that there's this common term that withers on the vine, meaning that it just sits in some lab and the researcher flies around the world. They still make physical posters, and then they go to conferences, academic conferences, and they stand next to their posters and they present them in the hope that kind of someone comes and is like, I want to fund this is amazing. But the chances actually of getting funded when you're not at kind of one of the top universities in the world is super low. It's actually also something that we're super passionate, maybe if any of your listeners are hearing this, we're super passionate and interested in finding research across Asia. I once went to South Korea to a drug discovery conference there in 2018, and I was amazed by the level of innovation that is coming out of different South Korean universities, but the same is true for Japan, Malaysia, other countries in APAC. And there's such a huge language barrier to like actually getting things funded and getting things kind of translated into a global context. And I actually think this is kind of where DeSci gets super, super interesting. It's about globalizing research objectively, because most research, research can emerge from any corner of the world, regardless of kind of geography or institution. Yet most research that gets funded and gets translated only kind of comes from a few select top labs. And I think that's really what organizations like VitaDAO are here to change.
Would you say the target for VitaDAO is like the long tail of research that is not from the top research firm? So they might not see, the best biotech VCs, and they might not be able to get scientific grants because they're not from those firms. So there's kind of the long tail of kind of smaller research efforts that are getting funded.
You could look at it that way, but it's so I think researchers today are really fed up with how the system works. And it's not actually the long tail. So VitaDAO has funded some of the best longevity companies in the space that did like really competitive rounds, and is also working with some of the best scientists that are kind of just fed up with the status quo. And it's not necessarily the long tail. So for instance, we funded research at Newcastle University in end of 2021. This is actually one of our lead compounds, VITA-FAST. Oliver gave a really amazing update about VITA-FAST yesterday. And like I have, and from first meeting that researcher, his name is Dr. Viktor Korolchuk, to funding his research, it took us about 3 weeks. And it says it was the fastest that, the university was like, this is the fastest that we've ever interacted with anyone around this. And I remember it was competitive because there were other VCs that were also talking to this researcher. But then the VCs often can take 1.5 years. And sometimes the funding never materializes, because what the VCs try to do is they then try to set up companies. And they often also overfund the companies from a mandate perspective. They're like, we can't invest into this unless this is like a $1.5 or $2 million round. And then the research needs to be spun out. The researchers need to find their own lab. It becomes a very different process. And so VitaDAO makes that much, much easier by encapsulating the underlying research rights in an IP NFT, which enables kind of the globalization and decentralization of the research. And so VitaDAO funded VitaFast for around $300K, spun the IP out of the university. The university actually got tokens and the researcher got tokens. And then we tokenized it, I think, in summer last year. And I think it's now trading at a 25 million market cap. And so there's a lot of continuous funding now that can actually go into the project. It's controlled by a community of token holders. And the data that is now emerging, if any of your listeners are familiar with this, rapamycin has been kind of one of the lead or most well-known longevity compounds that exist out there. It's a kind of an FDA-approved drug. It's actually used in organ transplants. It's a specific immunosuppressant drug, and but it has a lot of side effects. Anyway, it's one of the only things that really that we know have data about that does extend lifespan. And the data that we're now getting from VitaFast is the compounds that being developed in VitaFast are 2 to 3 times better than rapamycin. And this is research that the DAO funded for $300K. It's publicly traded, and it's now kind of in this kind of price discovery mode around the underlying research.
I actually love to dive into that. So I think there's a lot that we can cover on the longevity and the actual research front, but I want to focus more on the crypto side. So I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of the degens who are checking in, they're always thinking, okay, how do I make money from this? So what is the incentive for people who are contributing capital? Like, is it the monetization of the IP rights, and if so, how does that happen?
I can take the start of that, and then Alex would love for you to chime in as well. Investing into biotech research or investing into science has never been possible. Like, if unless you're an accredited investor and you know what you're doing in biotech and you have that kind of deal flow, which for most people in the world they don't, and so this is about democratizing access to an industry that is very difficult to get into. If you, God forbid, if you ever get a specific disease, or a family member of yours, and let's say something really specific, and you actually start digging like, hey, what can I do in the space? How can I invest? It's so difficult to navigate that. And then additionally, to be able to invest into it has never been possible. And so the returns in biotech investing are actually huge. We're already seeing that now with some of the price discovery that we're getting around these VitaFast, like around VitaDAO's early compounds. I think other DAOs in the DeSci space are experiencing that as well. The fundamental value driver in biotech research or in scientific research broadly is intellectual property and kind of how intellectual property is secured. Pharma, I think the cash on, this was true, I think about a half a year ago before Ethereum started going up, but I think cash on certain companies, pharma companies' balance sheet, they have more cash on hand than the entire Ethereum network is valued at. So if you look at the total market capitalization of pharmaceutical companies or even of the biotech space, it is vastly bigger than the entire crypto space today. And so why should degens, to your question, why should degens care about this? I think there's this funny new term that is called a PhD gen, PhD gen. I think we're kind of seeing the birth of a new type of user that is actually starting to look deeply into the space. And as I said, I started investing into biotech companies when I was 21. It's not, once you figure out a little bit of how it works, it's not rocket science, but it's been very opaque so far. And so I think what DeSci offers, or what this new asset class really offers, is for people to have way more access to data and truth, and to be able to participate in the upside much, much, much earlier than is possible in other capital markets today. Alex.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that IP has historically been very illiquid, right? It was literally impossible to invest in IP before as a retail, right? So DeSci enables that. And it enables that at a very interesting stage to get involved, which is at the very, very early stage, right? So through VitaDAO and through these other BioDAOs, you can essentially find out about new IP being developed in real time, and you can participate very, very early on. So I think that creates a very interesting opportunity for retail to get involved. And they, to your point about degens, they can essentially also start trading on data drops, right? So one of the projects that Paul mentioned that VitaDAO funded, VITA-FAST, the project actually released a very promising data drop, I think 1 or 2 months ago. And if you look at token price, it actually went up as a result of that. So it also creates this new dynamic where the data coming out of this project is also publicly shared. And people can essentially start speculating on that. So I think it creates a very interesting and highly efficient dynamic for this new asset class. Whereas before, it was extremely opaque, and there was, you as a retail investor, it would be very, very hard for you to get access to in any sort of assets that would enable you to speculate or build an exposure to this sector.
I'd love to dive into the example of VitaFast a little bit more, because it seems like that's a pretty good case study. So I'm just on CoinGecko right now, pulling up VitaFast. So it seems like it is a token. It's valued at about 25 million right now, trading I think on Uniswap. So what is this token like? Does it promise holders access to future royalties that the researchers get if someone uses their research, or is this a meme coin tied to the kind of research? Or how does that work?
Yeah, it's definitely not a meme coin. There is there is real science happening behind this. So it was a sponsored research agreement that VitaDAO signed with the Newcastle University. It wrote a grant for that specific academic lab, and it essentially VitaFast is essentially the on-chain representation of that research. So take a step back and to walk you through the structure of this. So the first thing is we need to understand is what are IP NFTs, right? So IP NFTs are essentially representation of IP on chain. So they essentially have, for instance, they serve as the data room for the sponsored research agreement that VitaDAO signed with that academic institutions. They also serve as the key to access the all the data coming out of that research. And essentially VitaDAO owns that asset, right? So that asset is sitting on the DAO's treasury. So essentially, whatever IP that is ever created by that project for that specific research belongs to VitaDAO, right? So VitaDAO would have the ability to patent that IP if needed. All the royalties generated would be flowing back to the treasury and all that. Of course, like the legal structure behind all this is a little bit tricky because it's a DAO. Like it has to have like some sort of legal footprint to enable all this to happen. But essentially, this is what IP NFTs enable, right? And then there is the second instance of this, which are IPTs. So the best way to think about IPTs is fractionalization of IP NFT, right? So IP NFTs are essentially NFTs, right? So they're non-fungible, they're represented on chain, and they can only be owned by one specific entity, whereas IPTs can be owned by multiple people at the same time, right? So what we did is we fractionalized that IP NFT into an IPT, and that IPT is called VITA-FAST, right? So that enables for decentralized governance and decentralized ownership over that specific asset. So if you are a token holder of VitaFast, you can essentially govern how that research project will be developed. You can essentially vote on proposals. So in the same way that VitaDAO has its governance forum, VitaFast has its own governance forum as well. So you can essentially use your tokens to participate and make decisions around how that asset will be developed and maybe the future how that asset will be monetized as well.
So I guess two follow-up questions from that is, number one, in terms of like enforcing development, how does it, how is it carried out? Like, let's say I buy up a bunch of VitaFast right now and I say, hey, you should completely pivot this project and go develop, something that only I'm interested in. What sort of, fallbacks do the researchers actually have? And, conversely, if I, want them to keep on doing the current research and the researcher has other ideas, how do we make sure that, they kind of enforce the will of the DAO, so to say?
I actually think that would be a really interesting case study. We haven't actually seen anyone come in from the community yet and like have a really strong opinion about like that something should be done differently. The fallback here is, so essentially this is, I don't know what the ownership is in VitaFast exactly, but Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the DAO still holds 60 or 70% of the token supply.
I think 56, yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of have the DAO as being the main governance driver as a backstop, and but the community being able to openly participate, as well as the researcher being able to openly participate in voting. So like if you bought up a whole bunch and then made a proposal, you kind of have to hope that the DAO doesn't respond to that proposal, because the DAO could just vote anything down. Although the DAO actually has never voted with its tokens itself, and so there is a very active micro community that really cares about the decisions that are being taken. What I actually think is super cool here, again, if you invest into a biotech company, and we actually can't draw the analogy here to companies, I think really these should be considered as like community-based governance structures. You asked earlier if there are any kind of royalties that can flow back, and as of today, they cannot. So it's really about furthering the research. But to any of your listeners that are kind of more degens, this is like a fee switch. Like Uniswap has a fee switch, other DeFi protocols have fee switches. From a regulatory perspective, the fee switch is hard off. And also it doesn't really matter, like, because I think we often confuse as like Tesla or Amazon have never paid a dividend. And then you could be like, are these companies still valuable? Well, of course they are. I think in most of these research projects, we're at such an early stage that the fee switch concept really doesn't matter yet. And you have the DAO that still owns a majority, that like has some of the smartest people in biotech, in longevity, that are actually making sure these research projects progress in the right way. But you, as a PhD gen, have access to kind of the price discovery around this asset. Because what can happen in biotech is, like, if the data continues being good, actually the price appreciation of it can be drastic. Because VitaDAO really is a VitaDAO can be seen as a sum of its parts. Meaning, and these are like, and here you kind of get access to its best to research projects. I think that's what's really exciting about it. I think beyond the sum of its parts, though, you have an entire community, and you obviously have a treasury and all of the potential that actually the DAO can develop around any of those things. How could this actually play out? I think VITA-FAST is being considered for a bunch of indications. Indications typically are specific disease areas, where you would then actually, in the long run, be able to take a compound like this into clinical trials. At a point where it came into clinical trials, this would be worth in the hundreds of millions, like if it actually gets successfully approved for clinical trials. But then beyond that, actually, I think we underestimate the power potentially, if you don't have to go the clinical trial path, we underestimate the power of some of these compounds being commercialized by the DAO itself, and then the DAO owning 100% of the IP. You mentioned HairDAO earlier, so I think this is a great example, for instance, with HairDAO. In HairDAO, hair loss is not considered a disease, and so you don't need to go through the arduous process of actually getting clinical approval for developing new solutions or bringing new products to market. And then the monetization around them is enormous, because if you own the IP rights, you kind of have global exclusivity. If you have a patent in the IP rights, you have a global exclusivity to monetize that. And then either you can partner with global companies, like, just imagine this. If you have a new cure for hair loss, like, that is really valuable. Like, people are going to buy that. Same as if you have a drug that suddenly can extend lifespan by 10 or 20 years, you bet that people will buy that, and they won't care about crypto at all. They will care about the product. I think it's something that we often forget in crypto. Like, the people out there, they care about real things. They care about real solutions. They care about products. They care much less about kind of, I think, a lot of the kind of the casino that some of us find ourselves in when we kind of build in crypto, or in kind of the financialization of all of these things. And so actually, I think that's where DeSci is super interesting, because I think, yeah, it's something that I can tell my mom about. It's like, my mom doesn't care about, like, how does the governance work in this weird little DAO. She'll care about, like, oh, really? Will this drug really extend lifespan? Or like, yeah, like, will this really regrow my hair? Yeah.
Is this similar to how traditional funding works? Like, a biotech VC basically gets part of the royalties rights, or get the rights to the underlying drug, and then they get a payout if a pharmaceutical company buys out the company, or starts to develop a drug using that tech. Is that how it typically works as well?
So I think this is something really important. I really wouldn't consider DeSci DAOs as like funding entities or VCs, although they can perform a similar function. I think it's more like a vertically integrated pharma company, meaning VitaDAO is already going into commercialization. Like, a VC would never develop products and sell them, right? But that's actually where you make the margin. And so like, a VC is just in the business of like finding something, at least in biotech, finding something and then handing it off to the next buyer, which is some other VC or kind of a pharma company down the line. And so they're kind of in the business of like translating and then making a margin on that. These DeSci DAOs, if you really think the vision through, are like vertically integrated, meaning they fund super early stage research, and then they build a community of potential customers as well, and actually try to take things all the way through. Of course, in funding biotech or pharma research, once you enter clinical trials, that gets much more complicated, meaning the funding requirements are extremely large to commercialize something. It's one of the reasons also why VitaDAO, for instance, partnered with Pfizer. So Pfizer, the pharma giant, invested into VitaDAO in Jan 2023. Every time I say this, I still have to laugh, because it was such a huge sign of, I think, confidence for the DeSci space. And Pfizer invested not because they were interested in anything crypto related. They invested because they saw a really interesting pipeline of research emerge, and they realized the only way to get access to that research is through buying this token. And it took them about 6 months. And VitaDAO didn't have a legal entity, so they really just had to buy tokens, which was a really interesting experience. But I think it's a telltale sign of what actually might happen in the DeSci space. Like, Goldman Sachs would never buy Uniswap tokens. Like, I think, or they would never be an LP on Uniswap in like 2019. And so Pfizer investing into VitaDAO is more like if Goldman and JP Morgan and a few others had decided to be LPs on Uniswap or buy 1inch tokens or any of that. And that actually shows you that DeSci is much more, I think, compatible with the way that the industry that it's trying to disrupt or help is, because you have researchers that are really keen to work in DeSci or that are already very actively working in DeSci. You have patient communities that are forming, and you have kind of industry and pharma companies that are really interested in collaborating here.
Got it. And speaking of the DGens, so recently I think there's been a lot of excitement over DeSci on Twitter, on X, and Tarun Chitra, who is the founder of Gauntlet, which is a well-known company within crypto. I think he's recently raised some concerns that DeSci is becoming very hype-driven. It's becoming another hype-driven sector rather than developing kind of measurable progress. Curious, for both of you, did you first of all see that critique, and how do you think about the current state of DeSci right now? Is there a lot of hype, and how do you make sure that you stay clear of hype and focus on real development?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of noise around DeSci at the moment. But I would actually argue the opposite. I would actually argue that markets now are catching up to everything that's been built in DeSci for the past 3 years. And I think you can think of value being created inside these DeSci projects in a way that it was like a direct-to-consumer value that we haven't seen in crypto before, in my opinion. So in the case of VitaDAO, for instance, that Paul was just talking about, VitaDAO has already helped some of these contributors with their hair loss issue. And I think that's huge. So I think now markets are essentially catching up to everything that was created in DeSci in the past 3 or 4 years. And with respect to the hype, and I really think hype is an awareness building tool, and it tends to attract both the good and the bad, right? And I don't see that as a negative. I really don't care if people come from the hype as long as they stay for the value. That's how I tend to think about this stuff. So it attracts the good and the bad, but it really brings awareness around the sector, which I think is what we need, right? So I think another thing to point out is that price going up also serves as a marketing tool in crypto more broadly, usually, right? So it really strengthens our message, and I think we've been seeing that, for instance, with some of the researchers that are involved in some of our projects, right? So I'll give you an example for another project that we have live. So we talked a lot about VITA-FAST, but there's another one called VitaRNA, and we launched that project earlier this year. And one of the core researcher there actually received a very big allocation into the project when it launched. And those bags are actually worth quite a lot now. So I think this is what we're trying to do, to really reward people that are making this happen. And I think this recent hype and this recent change in value in their participation really makes the argument stronger around aligned incentives and good incentive structure for DeSci projects.
I think before anyone that has never spent time in DeSci is publicly criticizes DeSci, I really would implore on them to just spend time in the space and actually look at what's being developed. That's all. I don't know Tarun personally, but I've never seen him spend any time in DeSci. So it's almost like if you've spent no time in DeFi and then you have very loud opinions about DeFi, I think it's hard to take that serious.
Yeah, no, I think I'm guessing what he's referring to is the bunch of meme coins that launched on the back of that event that you guys did with CZ. It seems to have drummed up a lot of interest. A lot of traders in my circle are kind of talking, we were always excited about DeSci, but they've never even kind of talked about DeSci before, which is a little bit strange to me.
Yeah, I think that tide is going to pass, and unfortunately, whenever a new narrative gets into the crypto mainstream, you have a lot of people that are trying to profit from that, right? And so there are two I would call them science coins, not meme coins, which are Euro and Riff, that have gotten a lot of attention through a project called pump.science. Pump.science actually the compounds that are being tested on pump.science actually originated from VitaDAO. Meaning there was a project called the Longevity Prize, which funded researchers around the world, so these scientists around the world, to suggest experiments in C. elegans. C. elegans is the worm that the first experiments ran on pump.science with. And so this is actually real experimental data that was funded through the Longevity Prize, which was an initiative at VitaDAO. And I think there's a whole next series of experiments coming. On the tail end of that, though, you have a lot of people that are just kind of slapping DeSci onto anything and then launching it through pump.fun. And I think it's really important actually to see, to read in between the lines, you know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of listeners who are, dialing in, they probably heard about pump science as well. But for those of them who are not familiar, what exactly is pump science? Like what happened? Because I think a big part of the reason why people are suddenly interested in DeSci was because of this RIF token thing. So what is pump science? What is RIF? What is the story behind this?
I mean, so I think people were interested in it before that. So the bio protocol auction, I think it closed on the day or just before when we had that event with CZ in Bangkok. It was CZ and Vitalik. And so they've been looking at DeSci for a while. And pump.science was also around before then, but I wouldn't say that it's one of the main reasons why we've seen so much, I think, excitement or appreciation about DeSci. But pump.science very quickly gave people something to speculate on, right? And bio will only launch later this year or in early Q1. We're currently tying up the launch timeline. So what is pump.science? As I said, these compounds, rifampicin and urolithin A, are actually both compounds that are being studied for their life extension properties. And these were experiments that were originated from a public prize that VitaDAO held. And so what pump.science does, it essentially allows people to speculate on the outcomes of those experiments, but tying them together with a publicly traded coin. Honestly, I don't think and so what people get to see is what you're looking at right now is a live stream of the current set of experiments that are running. And these are now experiments in Drosophila flies. And so what people can do, if they want to participate in this experiment, they can bet on whether the flies are going to live longer with the one compound or with the other compound. And some of it is really funny. It's like, it's funny because like if a fly dies, for instance, on the one thing. So I think there's many people around the world that are actively watching this now and participating in this kind of global experiment. What this is doing, though, it is really democratizing longevity science. And actually, VitaDAO just held and so these are really common experiments that scientists will run to check whether a specific compound has life-extending properties or not. VitaDAO actually recently held a governance proposal to propose that VITA-FAST, the compound that we talked about earlier, that these are also then tested on pump.science. And so now you can kind of start putting the things together. Like the DAOs can use a platform like pump.science to actually live test and showcase to the world their experiments. So this to me is like the ultimate form of data creation. We talked earlier in the Fed about like how difficult it is to get any information about these biotech companies that are developing stuff. This is taking it to the nth degree and being like you couldn't get more live data about what is happening with a piece of research.
And just for those who are listening on Spotify, so for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see this. But we're basically screen sharing the Pump Science website, and we're looking at a screen with I think 4 tubes. A live feed of 4 tubes of flies, and you said these flies are fed with like different amounts of this chemical, the RIF chemical, and people can kind of bet on. Are they betting on like which of these flies live the longest, or how is that tied to the RIF token?
Honestly, like I think it's to everyone for them to choose themselves what exactly they're betting on when they buy these compounds, at least for now. But one could bet on that one of the compounds or both of them extend lifespan more than kind of the statistical norm, right? So the flies typically live for a certain amount of time normally, and so if the flies live longer, or if flies die sooner, or if there's any statistical anomaly, that would give insights to a researcher or to a PhD.
In the case of VitaFast, because as Paul was saying, VitaFast actually has a proposal live to test its compounds on pump.science as well. So in the case of VitaFast, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to test the solution that we have already. Like we already ran experiments with that solution in the lab. We are actually trying to bring that to animals now, to flies or to worms in the case of VitaFast. Sorry. And we're going to be comparing that against rapamycin. So rapamycin, as Paul was saying, is one of the core leading compounds that people take nowadays for longevity, right? But we do have indications that VitaFast can actually perform like 3x better than rapamycin. So we are actually now like proposing to test this on worms through pump.science and essentially, like enable real-time streams for people to actually see the results of that testing. So super excited about that. And again, like going back to the awareness and hype discussions, I think this could really be like a marketing tool for VitaFast for the entire project, and can actually help funnel in like trading liquidity into research.
God, this is really interesting. I think this is one of the more wholesome ways of like, I guess, leveraging the degeneracy of crypto to do something that is actually useful for scientists, right? Like, so I recommend people checking this out. I've heard about this on the periphery. I haven't dug into it myself, but this is really cool to see. Now, I know we're a little bit close on time, so just to kind of wrap us up here, if we really zoom out, right? If we zoom out from the meme stuff, from all the kind of hype right now. In the next 5-10 years, what are the biggest milestones that DeSci has to achieve before it can move on to like a mainstream kind of success and kind of graduate from this, passion for, a subset of crypto natives to something that kind of, changes the world?
I would think like the vision for the next 5-10 years for DeSci would really be to have the entire stack of scientific research being built on chain. And that includes having all the data open source, have all the publications live and open, not behind paywalls, and in addition to that, having like therapeutics being fully brought to the market through the forces of community. So I think these two things are really like the vision for the next 5 and 10 years that we are running after and in VitaDAO. So yeah, this way we can enable any community participant to benefit from this research that we're developing, and we can actually start doing open science and potentially rebuild the entire system from scratch as well.
Yeah, of course. I think that you kind of have to consider what is going to get this into major newspapers around the world. I think like if we always ask like 5 to 10 years from now, it's like what is actually going to prompt a big change in the industry? I think it would be really like big scientific breakthroughs that are generated through the system. I think with VitaFast, we might potentially be looking at one of the first, because this would make massive, like if some of the data that we're looking at is reconfirmed in the next series of experiments that are being run, this would make waves around the longevity industry, for instance. But I think beyond that, for instance, compounds entering clinical trials, we actually have one DAO that we're working with at BioProtocol, which is called Long COVID Labs. Really excited about them. Long COVID affects probably, in the estimates, a few 100 million people globally that have long-lasting effects from having been being exposed to the COVID-19 virus. It essentially means the viral matter never leaves their bodies. And we're working with a Stanford neuroscientist and serial biotech entrepreneur on this. And he's developed a cure for long COVID after he was exposed to long COVID himself. And we're running we're going to be running next year, hopefully, a stage 1 clinical trial with the University of San Francisco. And this is all now being coordinated through a DAO. And I think once you get successes from trials like that in the coming years, and really, like, DeSci actually takes a really long time. And it's something that crypto people, I don't think, are used to. And I think Murad actually said this really nicely. It's like, instead of trading, it's like invest in things that you believe in. I really think DeSci and the underlying assets or projects are things that you can believe in and that you can trust in. And maybe for your listeners, I think the biggest returns will be generated from like having strong conviction in strong scientific teams. Instead of kind of flipping the meme coins of the moment. So as Alex said earlier, come for the science, stay for the science. And I think you'll actually be exposed to, I think, probably the creation of a an entirely new sector in crypto and a new asset class. I often have liked DeSci at the moment to DeFi in 2018, 2019. Andrew Kang actually said a similar thing recently, I think in a tweet. And if you follow that logic, the next 2 or 3 or 4 years will be I think quite enormous for this space.
Yeah, thank you for that refreshing take. I think this is much needed, especially in this phase of the market. So for people who want to check out VitaDAO, check out Molecule, what are the best channels for them to do this? Alex, you want to kick us off first?
Yeah, sure thing. So you can go to VitaDAO.com. You can join our community. There is a Discord link there in the website. So join the community, introduce yourself, and start contributing. There's also a Telegram group where the community share their ideas and keep track of the latest developments there. Or if you want to go deeper into the weeds, you can also go to VITA-FAST.xyz and or VitaRNA.xyz to learn more about some of our leading projects. Again, these two also have publicly traded tokens, so you can also participate by like acquiring the token and being part of the community. As I said before in the beginning of this interview, there is room for everyone to collaborate, irrespective of your background and in your skill set.
Absolutely, Paul. And for Molecule, where can people go to check out more?
100%. You can just go onto molecule.xyz or onto catalyst.molecule.xyz. On Catalyst, we actually have a whole range of research projects that are being launched by the DAOs. So there you can kind of participate in the earliest stages. Catalyst currently runs on Base. And then also check out at BioProtocol. If any of your listeners participated in the Biogenesis auction, super grateful to all you guys. Thanks so much for the support. And stay tuned. The Bio Launchpad will be launching in early Q1. And watch out for the governance vote to make the token transferable. That will happen in the coming weeks. And it's at BioProtocol on Twitter. And Molecule is at Molecule DAO.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for this discussion, gentlemen. This has been really fun, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks for having us.
Hey there, Jason here. Thanks for supporting another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. If you enjoyed this, please give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And make sure you subscribe on YouTube so you can check out our founder interviews, our roundtable series on our venture thesis, as well as our On a Tangent sub-series about our current market views. And as always, you can reach out to me on X at Mr. Jason Choi. And I'll make sure to read every comment related to this episode. So I'll see you next time.